Hey y'all, this is Whitney of the Mama's Doula and themamasdoula.com, and today I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys about perinatal mental health disorders and my experience um, with postpartum anxiety. So we're gonna kind of break down what those are really quick. I'm going to give a brief overview of my story and experience, and then my husband, Papa Doula, is going to join us for like a quick bit for the experience from a dad's perspective. Okay, so what are PMADs? PMADs are perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And that is basically an umbrella term. It's not one whole condition. You might have aspects of one and not the others, or you might have a combination of a couple different things going on. Just like any other condition, they need to be diagnosed and assessed by a trained provider. So, preferably someone who is a psychiatrist, psychologist, or some kind of licensed clinical counselor or social worker or other mental health specialist. People who should not be trying to diagnose you, probably your obstetrician or midwife, your doula, family members or friends, your cousin with a psychology degree. It really should come from a trained mental health professional. And truthfully, the best person would be someone who actually is trained in perinatal mood disorders. Find someone who has a background or specializes in perinatal mental health, because a lot of times, in my experience, counselors who are just trained in general presentations of depression or anxiety or other mental health disorders, they don't necessarily understand the intricacies that come along with the hormones and the changes and everything that comes along with pregnancy and the postpartum period. Um, so definitely would recommend finding someone who actually understands those things, because they might pick up on things that other counselors may miss, or they might have an understanding of other things that other counselors may miss. So what are they exactly? Under that umbrella, the most common one I think people know about would be postpartum depression. The second most common, um, and actually clinically, I think the most common is actually postpartum anxiety. And then you have other ones like postpartum OCD or pregnancy OCD, bipolar disorder. A lot of women have their initial post bipolar ideations during pregnancy or in the postpartum, PTSD. There's a few other ones that might be coexisting with the antenatal or postpartum period. But those are the major ones. And then psychosis, postpartum psychosis, which is a whole other thing. So those are the big ones, the most common being the depression and the anxiety. All of those things, like I said, they can exist alone, they can exist in combination with other ones. So you can have postpartum anxiety and OCD. You could have, say, clinical depression before getting pregnant and then come out having bipolar. You might have had bipolar before, but wasn't really attuned to the different highs and lows, called the manias or hypomanias, and your depressions. You may not have been as aware of them until pregnancy. So a lot of times, they present different ways for different people. And in the African American community, a lot of times our mental health issues get swept under the rug, or they're overlooked. or the symptoms don't present the way that they um, are described in textbooks. So, one of the things I learned, and this is something that I was told through my therapy, things that I've read in articles and studies after the fact, and then realized I experienced myself, that a lot of us experience mental health disorders or symptoms. We actually experience them physically as well as mentally. So for me, I have anxiety. I have generalized anxiety disorder that wasn't diagnosed until the postpartum period with my oldest daughter. And one of the ways anxiety manifests for me is a GI disruption. So I might be really, really anxious about something, and it automatically triggers a lower GI issue, and I am like in the bathroom all day. So we're talking generally like upset stomach or diarrhea, cramping, um, just frequent bathroom trips. For me, not necessarily to the point of actually getting sick, but for some people, they might even experience nausea or vomiting from the GI upset. So that's something for some people. People who are depressed might experience headaches, aches and pains, um, just other things that they just typically write off as maybe another condition that they might have, as a one-off occurrence. And the other thing that I've had my counselor and I have talked about over the years is a lot of times when we talk about family histories of mental illnesses, and mental health complications, is how we describe them and what words we're using to describe them as. So instead of saying, oh, do you have a history of anxiety or depression or OCD or things like this, is anybody in your family high strung? Is anybody in your family quick to anger? Do they have a high temperament? Is there anybody in your family who's overly withdrawn? Is there a history of alcoholism or drugs and drug usage, or all of these negative coping mechanisms? And a lot of times when you start digging into these things and talking to the people, they might be showing signs of the various mental illnesses that have just never been officially diagnosed and treated. We're famous for trying to self-medicate, and a lot of times we're using coping mechanisms that are not the healthiest or the most beneficial. And there's a stigma a lot of times within our community about seeking out help from a mental health professional. Being labeled as unfit is a big one for Black women and women of color. Being threatened with CPS or Child and Family Services, whatever they call it in your area. A lot of women are afraid to self-report experiencing mental health struggles because they're afraid of having their children taken away. It's not always founded, but I'm not going to lie and say that it may or may not be used against them depending on the severity of the issue. And that's a very real fear. And probably one that even drives the anxiety or OCD to a higher height, because you're struggling, and if you possibly tell somebody that I'm struggling, I've had ideas about hurting myself or my children, or I've had this out of the blue thought or something like that, and you're afraid of what are they going to think, what are they going to say, who are they going to tell, and then what are going to be the consequences of that. It's not as simple to say that, oh, nothing will happen, we can't say that. And so that's a very real fear for people. And I think that when a person discloses to you that they're struggling, that we really need to come from an empathetic and understanding place. It may be a reason to have, if it's bad enough for the child to be removed from care, but more often than not, it's not. And the main thing is making sure that that mother is safe and that child is safe and that they're being supported adequately. So that's the biggest thing for me, I think, when it comes to understanding mental health from the Black experience. We're coming from a place where systems have not been in our favor. And so seeking help for these types of things is very, very hard to come by. And then it's also hard to find providers that can truly understand that frame of reference. So, it's a very, very delicate issue within our community. Being that there are more African American mental health professionals coming into the field, I do think, and with our generation, I'm a millennial, us having a more open stance to seeking out mental health support. Hopefully, we'll see that change. I know I have seen a couple different counselors over the years, and I felt really supported by some and not as supported by others. And then some were kind of somewhere in the middle. Finding the right counselor is a lot like finding a partner. You might meet somebody and they might be great and everything is wonderful, and then you might meet somebody and after a couple sessions, like, this is not it. And it's nothing against the person, they just not doing it for you. So don't feel that if you've seen a counselor and you're not getting the support that you need out of it, that you're stuck. Please find somebody else, and find somebody that's going to work with you and really understand you. And I think going to therapy knowing what you're looking for in a counselor. Do you want somebody who's going to kind of be able to pull things out of you and know what questions to ask and what buttons to push? Do you want someone who's going to let you just kind of like word vomit and then they just pull out the information they need? Do you want it to be a little bit of a give and take and conversational? What do you need from that person? And if they can deliver it, great. If not, then it's okay to say, hey, I appreciate everything you've done for me thus far. I think it's best that we go our separate ways and maybe help you find somebody else that's going to be a better fit for you. So that's my other mental health tip for the day. So my story, looking back on my life over the last almost 30 years, I'm the oldest of three biologically, and I've always had to play some kind of a caregiver role. It wasn't like really forced on me, but by the laws of nature and birth order, like, I'm the oldest, I felt like I had to take charge and everything, and I had to be a fixer. I am I'll do it myself, I'll figure it out. I don't need help. Was very much my MO a lot of my life. Growing up, I realize now the term would be ambivert, but I kind of went between being very introverted. I'm very introverted around large groups and people that I don't know, situations that are new to me, and inserting myself into spaces where people really have to know who I am or get to know me or understand me or have to speak and interact. It gave me a lot of anxiety. Like, it literally scared the crap out of me. I did not like it. It was not comfortable. I like to be in a very small, intimate group setting. And even with small, intimate group settings, again, if I didn't know anybody, it was very, very hard. If I knew somebody, I tend to cling with that one person, which actually ended up causing some problems with my relationship with my now husband, because he's very much an extrovert and he would go off doing his own thing and would leave me alone, and then I'm just sitting there like a bump on the log. So that was always kind of how I had been. So when I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, great pregnancy, no sickness, no physical ailments, I felt great. The one thing I regretted with that pregnancy is we were short staffed at my job at that time, and I didn't get to celebrate and enjoy my pregnancy, um, on my own. Like, I didn't have like the baby moon. Like, I didn't really get to go on the baby moon that I wanted. Um, I carried very small. So actually, what ended up happening a lot was I worked in retail at the time, and people can be really nasty, really, really nasty in retail. And I remember there was this one customer who came in and she was really rude. She got upset because, pregnancy brain. I had incorrectly rung up an item, and instead of correcting me in the moment and stopping me and saying, hey, I think you made a mistake, she let me process this transaction completely wrong, didn't say anything, just watched there, let me do it, and then had the nerve to go and complain to my boss after the fact, who had been kind of watching everything go down, but not really watching everything go down. She didn't know I had entered in the wrong price or whatever, but she'd been watching the overall transaction. And so then she goes and complains to my boss that I was being discriminatory against her because she worked for Uber and some crazy, and how she didn't have to spend her money here and she didn't even like our store. And I'm kind of like, well, no one's forcing you to shop here. And, I'm telling my boss, I'm like, she forgot that she told me 2 weeks ago when she was in here, but she doesn't like our store. So we're being like snippy, going back and forth. Don't do that, guys. But at the end of this whole transaction, my boss tells me, she's like, you know what, go in the back, chill out, like, it's okay. And she comes in the back later and she's like, oh my God, are you okay? Because she knew I was pregnant at the time. So my emotions were running high all over the place. And that probably should have been my first sign. Like, I was and I think you're emotional when you're pregnant, but I was very emotional, like, very, like, I could go from 0 to 60 like super quick. I could be, very baseline normal, and then I could be like super, super snippy really, really quick. And so she was afraid that, I was going to do something crazy or anything like that. And I'm like, no, like, she's not worth my job. Like, I'll calm down. Like, it's fine. But yeah, people would try it because they didn't know I was pregnant. I carried small, to the point where a few of our regular customers, when they came in later and they saw me, and at that point I was visibly pregnant, they're like, oh, are you like what, 5 months, 6 months? And I'm like, no, I'm like 9. I was getting ready to give birth any day. And I think people would have been like, oh, like, and they felt bad because nobody likes being intentionally mean to the pregnant girl. But when, I'm just the regular, store manager, like, it's okay to be rude. But no one wants to be rude to the pregnant girl. So that was my first inclination looking back. Like, I got really snippy with people when things were not going right. My husband probably would complain more often than not, but that's just my personality. Like, I go from like being like kind of meh and whatever to being like really, really short, really, really quick. What I think truly triggered my anxiety is, so I was clinically diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Poking around on some of the different websites and resource sites that are out there online, my two favorites is Postpartum Support International and 2020 Mom, 2020 Mom / the Blue Dot Project. They're like a nonprofit and a 503c group. I think I had a combination of anxiety, PTSD, as well as postpartum OCD. The last two are not clinical diagnoses. I don't believe I actually ever received an actual diagnosis of PTSD or OCD. But just based on the symptoms alone, I do think that I had those in addition to the anxiety. Um, my daughter was born 37 weeks with a condition called IUGR, intrauterine growth restriction, which essentially means that the baby is not growing at the rate that is to be expected. So she wasn't measuring at the size markers or whatever you want to call it that they felt she should have been at her gestational age. She was measuring behind her benchmarks. She was measuring smaller consistently for some weeks, and the doctors pushed for an induction. Most people are aware of inductions for what are called post-dates babies. So if these are babies who are like 41 weeks, 42 weeks, these are babies that are like overdue. And occasionally people will hear about inductions for babies younger than 37 weeks because they are sick or the mother is sick and has complications and they need to get the baby out in order to save both the baby and the mom. So things like preeclampsia, placenta previa, different complications in pregnancy that might warrant an early delivery. But like I said, in my case, I was perfectly healthy. The baby was healthy. Really wasn't any determination to be induced early, but that's what the doctors decided to do, which immediately sent me into a tailspin. The day that I was told this news, I had told my husband to actually stay home, skip that appointment, because it was just going to be an ultrasound and a checkup, and it was going to take, 20-30 minutes for the ultrasound, 10-15 minutes for the checkup, and I was out of there. And that's not what happened. They made this recommendation for induction. My OB was consulted, or the on-call OB was consulted, but no one actually asked me what I wanted to do. And being that I was a first-time mom, I didn't know what my rights were as a birthing person, and I didn't know what questions to ask. And so I just felt like I was being dragged along for this ride that I didn't want to get on in the first place. So I was induced, ended up having a completely normal, uneventful delivery. Everything in the scheme of things went well. And most people were like, well, great, you were induced, womp womp, that's sad, but you have a beautiful baby girl and she's healthy and everything's great. Like, I wasn't like, physically harmed. I didn't have to get an emergency C-section. So it was great. It was a success. Why are you upset? But it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't the birth I had imagined. It wasn't the birth I had planned for in the scheme of things. And I feel like I wasn't allowed to grieve that. Like I was made ashamed to grieve that. Like I wasn't allowed to. Like, it's literally, the baby's here. She's fine. She's healthy. Why are you upset? So that was number one. And then number two was I was a first time mom. I have helped take care of children before. I've kept children overnight. I've helped my mother with people. I've babysat. But this was my baby, and this child was completely dependent on me and my husband now. There are no takebacks. Like, this is final sale. And that scared me. And I don't recall at any point in my pregnancy of anyone telling me that that would be a normal feeling, that was to be expected, that it would have been okay to feel that way. So, now I'm home with this baby. She's 3 weeks early. I wanted to breastfeed exclusively, but she had a posterior tongue tie. At the time, no one told me that she had one. I didn't even know I couldn't even have told you what a posterior tongue tie was at the time. And she loved to nurse, but it was painful. It was awful. I mean, like, I had the whole 9 yards, the engorgement, the cracked nipples, the bleeding, wincing in pain, toe curling. It was awful. And what triggered, I think, the second cascade was, okay, my body was not capable of growing a normal full-size baby. So my body has failed me in that regard. And now I have this baby and I have to feed her. And personal choice, was pretty adamant about not giving my baby formula. I did not want her to have formula. Formula is great for people who need it or choose to use it. That is not what I wanted for me and my children. I wanted them to be exclusively breastfed. Breastfeeding is the physiological and biological norm for infants, and it is the best source of nutrition for them. Ultimately, whatever you decide to do is what you decide to do. But that was my opinion, that was my belief system, and I was sticking with it. So it was very challenging when I had decided that I wanted to breastfeed, and now that was not going the way that I wanted it to or needed it to. A lot of people are, breastfeeding is natural, but that doesn't make it easy. And as a society, we are so quick to, whenever something's difficult, we just toss it to the side, or we find some shortcut workaround type of thing. And while that might work for some people really want to troubleshoot and get to the base issue. And so, people telling me, oh, we'll just use formula. Well, no, I don't want to just use formula. Babies are meant to breastfeed. Why isn't she breastfeeding well? There's got to be a problem. And nobody was really listening to me at that point. They're saying, just give formula or just pump. I have the doctors on the other side telling me, well, your baby's already small and now she's about to be failure to thrive. That's another thing that it's little things just kept being, heaped on me. Like, your baby has IUGR, like, you're short-staffed at work, you didn't even get to enjoy being pregnant. Now the baby's here and they're failure to thrive because they're not breastfeeding well. And it was all just becoming too much. And I want to say she was about maybe a month and a half old, and I was having a really hard time. This is where the OCD came in. I would complain about being tired and overworked, yet I wouldn't let anybody do any of the work. I had to do everything by myself. I had to change the baby's diapers. I had to make sure that she nursed exactly, like, it's been an hour and a half, like she could not go over 2 hours without eating something. My mom would come over in the evenings to help with the baby, and she would like, oh, go take a nap, but I would spend the entire time awake because I was like, oh my God, she's going to drop the baby, she's going to need something, the baby's going to cry. I was just making up all kinds of things in my head about why I couldn't go to sleep, and so I wouldn't go to sleep, so I was sleep deprived on top of everything else, and it was just terrible. And one night Ashante was getting ready to go to work, and it was like everything just came crashing down at the same time, and I just burst into tears. I was inconsolable, like hyperventilating, snotting, inconsolable. It was bad, and I just could not be left alone with that child. I did not feel like I was safe with her, being left alone. And not that I was going to hurt her, like I never had ideas that I was going to hurt my child intentionally, but it would be stuff like, I'm going to walk down the steps and miss a step and fall and hurt the baby, or I'm going to fall asleep while holding her and drop her and hurt her that way. It was things that, like, yes, this could happen, but the likelihood of it happening is very, very low. Her dying of SIDS or choking on breast milk or whatever. Not completely irrational things, but irrational in the course of everyday. Like, I wasn't doing anything to put her in those immediate dangers. And he called his mom. And he called my mom, and he was like, Whitney really needs you all to be there with her. I don't know what's going on with her, but I have to go to work, and I don't know how to help her. And they came over, like, ASAP, And, they sat with me for a little while. My mom was like, I know you don't really want to pump. At the time, we were supplementing to get her weight back on track. She's like, why don't you pump and then go lay down, and really try to go and lay down and get some sleep. So I did. Got maybe 2 hours of sleep, but it was more than I had been getting. And that's when I knew something wasn't right, and I knew that I needed to get help. So when my postpartum visit came up at 6 weeks, I want to say she was about a month old. So when my postpartum visit came up, I had already called and spoken with a counselor that was affiliated with my OB's office to get seen. So that was where my anxiety started. Once I started going to therapy and kind of digging through what my issues were, like I said, things that came up was, me being very type A, always having to be in control. The most revealing thing that came out of that was I suffer from catastrophic thought processes. So, like I said, I would have ideas like, I'm going to walk down the steps and I'm going to miss a step and fall on the step and hurt the baby's going to die, have a concussion, something like that. My brain doesn't go from one rational thought to another rational thought. It goes from a thought or an action to some completely hyperbolic idea. So my husband works at night, and a lot of times what would happen is I would wake up in the morning and he wouldn't be home from work. Most people would just say, oh, like he must have hit some, rush hour traffic. Maybe he stayed late for some OT. Me, I'm like, okay, he's 5 minutes late. Okay, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. Oh, he must be dead. And I'm not being like funny, like, haha, he must be. I'm literally thinking, my husband is in a ditch on 295, flipped upside down somewhere. Like, that's literally where my mind would go. Like, it would be like the complete extreme of possibilities. So one of the things that I had to learn in therapy was how to bring my thoughts back down to a rational level, and do like thought mapping and really figure out like what is triggering these thoughts, where are these thoughts kind of coming from, the timing of it, why am I having these thoughts? And then when I had a hyperbolic reaction to it, is this logical? Is this not logical? Like, is this really possibly even going to happen? Yes or no? So therefore, is it logical or not logical? Like, how did I arrive to this decision? Just kind of working through the steps. And sometimes what was great for me was seeing all of that written down on paper really made me realize how ridiculous some of my thoughts were. But in my mind, these were very real possibilities. And, I would try to talk to family about it in a roundabout kind of way. And like I said, typical Black family, you're just told, oh, you just got pushed through. You don't, you're a mother now. You don't have time to be worrying about that. And it was just very frustrating. It was very frustrating. And it took me about 8 months. I didn't have to do medication. It was talked about at one point, possibly going on medication to control the anxiety, but we ultimately decided that I didn't really need it. I was able to manage it with just talk therapy on its own and incorporating other self-care techniques and mechanisms to ensure that I was at my most optimal mental health. So I did therapy for about almost 8 months, till I got to a point where I was like, I feel like I'm okay. I had like some travel and family things coming up, so it was just really hard to get scheduled and get in and be seen, which I would say is probably another personal critique of my therapist. Like, for so many people to be in the field, y'all are really booked up. I started having a really hard time getting in to see my therapist. Um, and again, at the time, it was like, well, I don't really want to go through the hassle of trying to find somebody else. So I'm just, I'm either going to have to go to, not seeing her as often as I need to or want to, or finding somebody else. And eventually I just stopped, going and scheduling altogether. So fast forward to this past summer, so 2019, I found out I was pregnant with my second child. And that actually triggered a prenatal depression in combination with weaning depression. And that's one of the ones that's not on that list. I think it's a struggle when you know that there are people in this world that really want children and struggle with fertility and getting pregnant or staying pregnant. And at the time, I knew I had some friends going through some of those struggles, and it felt very selfish to not want to be pregnant. I'm in the middle of certifying to become a board certified lactation consultant. So I was going to school, I was working, I have a toddler that's running around, getting involved with different advocacy projects and things like that. The last thing that I wanted or needed was to be having another baby, and I was just convinced it was going to mess up my timelines for everything. But I was immediately struck guilty with the thoughts of, I'm not happy about this, because how can you not want this baby? How can you not care, about this new life that you're growing, because it's going to throw off your timeline? And that felt very selfish to me. And I felt like a horrible person for thinking those things. And I struggled with that for a very long time. I want to say the majority of my pregnancy. And even to this day, sometimes when I think about it, I was like, God, that was a really terrible thing to think or feel or say. But it's my truth. I was not excited about this pregnancy. I love my daughter. Don't get me wrong. I love both my children. But neither one of them were planned. And so both times I was like, this is like the worst thing that could happen to me right now. So I really, really struggled with that. And on top of that, I was weaning because I was pregnant. We were in the process of slowly weaning off of breastfeeding, but once I found out I was pregnant, I knew I wanted a break in between the two kids. So I was really trying to wean, and nobody told me about the hormonal drop off that comes with weaning, and how that can trigger depression in some people. And it just put me in a tailspin. Like, I was sick this time around. Like, I had pretty rough morning sickness and nausea for the first 3 or 4 months. And it was 1 week in August, September. Once I was like 3 months pregnant. I was like 3 or 4 months pregnant, almost 4 months pregnant. And I was just miserable. I was miserable physically. I was miserable mentally. I was upset. I was sick. And I just hated everything and everybody. And to the point where, again, like, I'm crying at the drop of a hat. Like, it was awful. And I knew I needed to talk to somebody. And I remember talking to my mentor on the phone, and I literally cried for like 2 hours on the phone with this poor woman. And she asked me, she was like, have you reached out to anybody? Have you thought about going and seeing somebody? And that's when I knew I needed to get serious about it again. And this is why I say it's really important to find someone who is trained in perinatal mental health. When I spoke to a counselor about what was going on and what I was feeling, and how everything kind of was transpiring, And she's like, hold on 1 second. You said that you're pregnant, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, and you're breastfeeding, or you were breastfeeding, and I was like, yes, I'm weaning. And she was like, oh, that's definitely like a side effect of the weaning. Like the weaning is literally making you crazy. She said you're probably experiencing a little bit of depression from the hormonal drop off. Makes so much sense now. And this is from somebody who's a lactation counselor. Like, I know that there's a hormonal drop off, but like anything else in, pregnancy and postpartum, you can know about it, but you never think it's going to happen to you. So here I was experiencing depression from the pregnancy and the feelings I had about the pregnancy. And then I'm also experiencing depression because of the hormones dropping off that were just adding on to everything else. Plus I still have anxiety. So I was just a great big bundle of nerves this entire last pregnancy. But because I kind of knew what I was up against this time, I knew that by experiencing postpartum anxiety and then prenatal depression, I knew I was at more risk this time around for postpartum depression. I knew I was at more risk for postpartum anxiety. I knew I was at risk for other PMAD disorders. So I really took the time this last pregnancy to educate myself. Not only on the different possibilities and what to be prepared for and what to expect, and how to support and advocate for myself, I really, I realized that some of my original triggers went back to not being as informed and educated around birth and the postpartum period and knowing what I needed and wanted at the time. So I really made an effort to go back this time and say, okay, well, I want a natural childbirth. Well, how are you going to do that, sis? Like, you need to plan for that. And, I had teetered back and forth with my first daughter about having a doula. Was it really necessary? I was guilty of the thought process that, doulas and lactation consultants, they were kind of frivolous expenses. The whole idea of a doula was a very white people thing to do. I had my husband and I had my mother, but it wasn't until I started doing some of the work around processing my birth and what happened. As much as I love my husband and my mother, they were not prepared or qualified to deal with what I needed them to do and to be the support I needed them to be. They weren't it. And I went into this pregnancy kind of knowing that it's very hard for people to support you through something and understand something that they've never experienced themselves. And so my mother's a nurse. She's an amazing, wonderful person, but she never had a natural childbirth. So my husband's a man. So he's never had a baby either. He's never even experienced menstrual cramps. So, to see me in a hospital bed and to be in pain and, not being able to cope well with that, the first thing that they're going to ask for is, in her pain and suffering. That was the epidural, that was Pitocin, it was, the cascade of interventions and things. So I knew going in, I'm like, okay, doulas are not negotiable. Like, I need a doula. I need to be prepared with the tips and the tricks and stuff like that because I want this natural childbirth. And people were like, the other thing that I think kind of pissed me off and caused me to have some residual anxiety with this pregnancy is words do have meaning and have power. And so I was running into a lot of, oh, you want to have a natural childbirth? Like, why? Oh my God, you're still breastfeeding at 2 and you're pregnant. Like, you shouldn't do that. There was a lot of like little microaggressions being thrown at me instead of getting supportive responses or, like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Let me, look that up or research it or whatever. the only people I really were getting that from were like my online community of friends who were supporting everything that I was doing. And I really needed those people. And I am so grateful to you. You all know who you are. They're like, oh, like you're going to go to school and be pregnant and work. More power to you, sis. Like, I got you, or, you're breastfeeding through your pregnancy. Like, you badass. Like, go ahead with your bad stuff. Like, whereas other people were finding things to take away from me or, projecting their anxieties and their failures on me, I had people who were lifting me up simultaneously. And I am so thankful for that. So needless to say, I did have my natural birth with my last daughter. I prepared for what the postpartum could be. What I did not expect is, depending on when you're watching this, we are in the middle of a pandemic. I was not expecting this COVID-19 disease to pop up. So whereas I thought I was going to be exiting my postpartum, my own postpartum quarantine, my staying at home period, when I felt like I would have been free from that and be able to, travel and start reintegrating myself with society and going back to work, I was told we had to stay home even longer. So at this point, I've now been in the house probably pushing definitely 3 months, almost 4. And that I think is starting to toy with my mind a little bit too. But I've been proactively, doing counseling. I've been going to support groups, utilizing technology to the best of my ability to stay connected with people where we can. Doing social distancing out in public. I'm very much like a sundowner type of person. So when the weather is sunny and great and it's warm, like I'm happy and upbeat. When it's sad and rainy and cold, I tend to be a lot more withdrawn and depressed. So really just trying to find the light in things, so that I can function on a higher level has been the biggest thing for me. It's not something that I think ever goes away completely, at least not for me. I find that I still do have moments. I don't feel like I'm experiencing postpartum depression or anxiety to the scale that I did with my oldest by any means. I feel like I have a better handle on things this time. I have the tools to cope. I have the support systems in place that I need, but it's not like all protective. So there's still been days and moments where I have felt like I'm a bad mom, and I felt like I was really, really struggling. Going from a mom of 1 to a mom of 2 was a huge transition that you know about and people tell you about, but until you're actually in it and you're doing it, it's very, very hard to imagine. And there were nights recently where I'm holding the baby and I just cried. But it ended up being very cathartic and very healing, because it's like, okay, let me get out of my system, and then, typical Black response, okay, we're going to shake it off and, and move on with the rest of our day. But being able to tell people like, hey, today's not a good day for me. I really feel like a crap parent today. Just being able to tell people like, yeah, all my kids ate today was crackers and apple juice, and not feeling like I am the worst mother in the world and that I'm somehow subconsciously harming my children has been so incredibly freeing this time around. It's just like, she ate what she ate, and that's that. And just taking things as they come has been, I think, the best outcome of this. For people who are currently experiencing some of those feelings, I just want you to know that there is help out there. It's not an end all be all thing. Um, my friend Shelly said it the best this way. I have anxiety, but it doesn't have me. Um, you can get a handle on it. I have a handle on mine now. The point of me going to therapy now isn't to fix the problem, but for me to maintain it, for me to identify that my coping skills and mechanisms are still working. And if I start to find myself going back into those destructive and intrusive thoughts and things like that, and start experiencing some of the other symptoms, really checking myself and saying, like, are these tools working for me anymore? Do I need to switch something out? Do I need to change something up so that I can be the best version of myself? It's it's not me being crazy. I'm not sitting up in a room, doing one of these rocking numbers and afraid to go out and mingle in the world and all that type of thing. Um, I'm not crazy. I mean, I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. Um, what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, you're not crazy. Um, so just keep that in mind. And the struggle really doesn't have to last always. So on this maternal mental health week, in this maternal, in America, it's also apparently health, maternal mental health month. But in this mental health month, May is mental health month. So in the spirit of that is really just do a really good job of checking your awareness. There's a lot going on in the world right now. We've got this pandemic, and even within the pandemic, there are still babies and mamas being born, especially for my first time moms. There's two people being born that day, and that's you as a parent and that child. And it's a very, very special and fragile time. But it's so gratifying when you have the right people around you, when you have the right supports in place. And I know with a lot of the guidelines and restrictions going on right now that's a very hard thing to cultivate. So find community wherever you are, however you can. Know that there are resources available to you. So Postpartum International, like I said, is one of the great resources that I love. They have support groups wherever your local state may be. See if some of these, I know a lot of hospitals have suspended their support groups, but there are still a lot of other places. My job, the Babies Born Healthy program, I know we're hosting things for our clients. If you hired a doula, check and see if the Doula Collective is hosting anything for their new parents. There are different nonprofits and groups like mommy groups and things like that they're all hosting virtual meetings. Find your community however you can. You're going to need it. It will be not only a help to you, but you may be going through something and you can help somebody else. You never really know until you start talking to people. So I found that even with my anxiety, that my story and my struggle has been a point of light and of guidance to other people, especially, like I said, especially within the Black community. I don't see myself as being brave by any means, but a lot of people may look at me that way because I'm not afraid to talk about it. And I find that more often than not, people are going through the same thing or similar things, but nobody's talking. So nobody knows what the other person is thinking or feeling, and everybody feels like they're, socially distanced or isolated, when really we're all in the same boat together. And we're all going in the same direction, but everybody's in their own heads and feeling like they're all apart. So definitely check out those sites. I will link them down below, and it will also be in the accompanying blog post to this vlog. And that's that. I'm going to go grab my husband, and when I come back, I'll have him talk really, really quick, because I feel like I've been talking for a long time about, what he's experienced when it comes to perinatal mental health, and his experience as the dad and the partner. So stay tuned. Okay, so I have Papa Dula with me now, my husband Ashante.
Hi, Shante. That be me.
And I wanted him to come and sit in and give his experience, I guess, or from his perspective, what it was like dealing with somebody that was going through a mental health disorder. And I guess how he feels about how fathers, I guess, are treated, because 1 in 10 men are actually at risk from developing their own postpartum or perinatal mental health disorders as well. Like I said earlier, we focus so much attention on the baby, and then the mom's kind of an afterthought, and then the dads are an even bigger afterthought. So, dad.
My experience with dealing with your postpartum,
Yeah.
or in both.
So this, first things first, I didn't mention it earlier, and I feel like I should now. So one thing I realized really like kind of irks me is when people be like, "Oh, dealing with your postpartum," and I was like, "Are we referring to the fact that I was a postpartum person, or the fact that I had postpartum anxiety?" And postpartum is not a disease, guys. Postpartum is a state of being after having given birth to a child. So I think in this case, words really matter. So when we're referring to postpartum, it's not postpartum. Like anyone who had a baby is postpartum. Are we talking about postpartum anxiety? Are we talking about postpartum depression? Are we talking about postpartum psychosis? Be very specific in what we're saying, because I think it makes parents be fearful of what the postpartum period is, thinking that everyone's going to walk away with some kind of mental health disorder, and that's not the case. But being realistic in what the postpartum is like, you might have the baby blues, which is feelings of sadness or uneasiness, but it's usually really, really short term, like usually within only the first couple days of being postpartum. Anything that goes on for weeks or presents within the first year of life, of the baby's life, would be falling into the category of some kind of a PMAD. So I just wanted to get that out the way. Okay.
Right. So my experience with it, with our first child, Natalie, it was in 2017. When you were going through your anxiety, I was scared a little bit because when I worked at night and you're with the child alone, and it's not fearful of like you would cause harm to the baby, but I just knew what you were going through and you would seem overwhelmed with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just reached out to my parents because I just feel like they had the most experience with it and they could help. But I knew you'd get through it. I mean, that's one of the reasons we started dating, because I knew you'd be a great mom. So I just thought if we could just get past this period in time, things will be much better. And my philosophy is just take it one day at a time.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's, in a nutshell, how I was feeling.
Were you afraid it was going to happen again?
No, because we had the experience this time around. Because I think the first time was more so it was just getting lack of sleep, and I think that had a lot to do with it because you just can't function when you're not, rested. And this time around, we had the experience, and anywhere that you feel sure, I know I could pick up because of the experience we gained with our daughter. So, yeah.
So, you think my anxiety is better this time around than it was, isn't it?
Oh yeah, you haven't even need therapy this time around for the most part. I know you're going, but I don't think you're using it as much. I could be wrong. I mean, she hasn't talked to me about it, but she seems better this time around.
I am better this time around.
Yeah.
Do you think if there was ever a time that you might have experienced or been feeling something along the lines of some kind of postpartum anxiety or depression yourself, like did you ever feel like you were struggling with adjusting to being a new father? Like I said, a lot of times I think guys kind of, I don't think you all are, men are just not raised, I think, to really be in tune with their feelings or express their feelings. And I feel like sometimes guys be like, oh, like I'm not depressed, but then like you're doing like very destructive behaviors, or like and not even destructive behaviors, but it could be like like you said, we're not talking, we're not communicating, like you're kind of like withdrawing, or not you so much, even though you were just playing video games. You're not really a gamer per se, but like the guys who like become like obsessive gamers, and like they never want to really be too involved with what's going on with the kid, and they're always finding some other distraction. You know, oh god, maybe some kind of aggression or something. I just feel like there's a lot of other ways, like I said, that mental health presents itself. Like some people have physical manifestations, so like they're having headaches or stomach aches, or maybe you got the bubble guts, or like I was getting the bubble guts. Do you feel like you experienced any of those things that maybe looking back that you might have been experiencing, like your own?
Yeah, mine all came down to one situation, and it was before Nat was born. We had my little episode at the bar, and I started crying.
What was your little episode at the bar? Please tell the people the episode at the bar.
So I think it was it was September 2017. It was like maybe 2 weeks before Nat was born. Of course, we didn't know because she was due in October. But I was sitting at the bar with a friend of mine, and Whitney shows up, and she comes in with a cake, and it's a cake symbolizing my anniversary with Delta. And for some reason, just seeing the cake and that she remembered that I actually have an anniversary date in my job, and it was 7 years, it just meant the world to me. And for some reason, I just couldn't hold it together. And then I just lost it. My emotions came rushing through, and in that moment, I just started to think about all the things that were about to happen and change in our lives, and it was overwhelming because, I've never had to be a provider for, more than just Whitney. And when you have a child, they're there forever. And it was a lot. And just processing all that and what's about to happen, and trying to reassure Whitney that I wasn't going to let her down. Not that I ever have, but I just felt that, extra to, get things going. So, yeah, just thinking about it kind of gets me there again, too. Because now we have two.
And then there were two. So what advice would you give to like other guys, especially, like I think one thing I would love to do is like to have like not for me to like quote unquote have a support group, but I would love for there to be like a network
of guys. Yeah.
Like y'all need like a brotherhood, because like I'm in support groups and I run support groups. Like I feel like there's just so many resources for women and like the birthing parent, and then there's like nothing for the supporting parent or the dad. So what would you suggest, or like what would be your, like what do you think guys need?
It would be nice to have like a network of guys that kind of going through the same thing that you can just bounce ideas off of, and also what's worked for me is also having like family members that are kind of in the same situation but a little bit progressed and further along. They have older children. You can reach out to them and ask them questions about how they did things, which we do to this day. Like, because we're going through potty training, which is a task on itself. Anyways, so that would be great. But any advice I would give to guys that are about to be parents, don't change who you are. Be consistent, be reliable, understand that you and your mate, wife, girlfriend, whatever, are a team now. And, just try to do the best you can and be the best spouse for your partner. Try to read, what they need before they need it. Yeah. I think that's all I got for that.
That's all you got for that? I think that was very insightful.
Any other questions?
No, I don't have any other questions. So, so I just, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this vlog. Like I said, there is like a supplemental, a shorter blog post. Normally I write like a long blog post, but there'll be a shorter post to kind of go with this video. So you can check that out at themamasdoula.com. And I thank hubby for coming up from his man cave. And, just chit-chatting. He might make appearances in the future if he's up to it, because it was his idea in the first place. But I just really thought it would be beneficial to also get, like I said, the man's perspective, because like I said, so much goes into the birthing parent, and what they need and how they're supported. And, the supporting family members need help too. And like I said, one of the things that I know made a big difference with my pregnancy and postpartum this time around was the fact that I planned. I planned for what I was going to need in birth. I planned for what I was going to need in the postpartum. And so I kind of went into it knowing what I would expect or what I could expect, both good and bad. And I do think that had something to do with me having a better outcome as far as my anxiety. Like I said, my anxiety is under control. Husband did not have any meltdowns in the sushi bar this time around. Like I forced us to go to like birth classes and things like that and support groups and stuff. So like, just like he said, having our network be a lot stronger this time around. So I will hope that in the future, any of our friends that are thinking about starting their families, start planning your pregnancy before you get pregnant. And one of my friends who is a postpartum doula, she said you have to plan for your postpartum. You don't wait till the baby is here to start putting things in place. Know that these things can happen. Like, no one is immune. You don't know, like you could be the 1 in 5. I'm the 1 in 5. He's the 1 in 10 dads. Looking on the outside, nobody would probably think that we struggle with the different effects of depression or anxiety that comes along with being a new parent. I think a lot of people look at us and think that we have it all together, and we definitely do not have it all together.
Bro, one day at a time.
We're hanging on by a thread. So like he said, we really just lean into our other family members. We lean on our friends, internet friends, real life friends. Everybody's virtual because of the Rona right now. So just, making sure that you have your people, have your supports. If you've got some unresolved things from, your past life, your childhood or early adulthood, start working on those traumas now, because you don't want to carry that into your next phase of life. Just give yourself as much space to breathe and to grow as a person and as a parent. That's it. Thanks for hanging out with us, and hope to see you soon. Bye.